5 minutes to the author of the legislation, Mr. McKinley from West Virginia.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, rise today in strong support of H.R. 3017, the Brownfield Enhancement and Economic Redevelopment Act, and I'm pleased to be a sponsor of this bipartisan effort, along with my colleagues, Chairman Walden, especially Chairman Shimkus, and Ranking Members Pallone and Tonko for their work. I also want to thank the work of my colleagues on the T&I Committee, who also were co-sponsors of this legislation, Mr. Katko and Ms. Esty. The bill represents a broad bipartisan compromise that will reauthorize this Brownfield program for the first time since 2006. In addition to this authorization, the bill makes several key improvements that you've heard about here today that will result in more brownfield sites being cleaned up and returned to productive use. But a little history can explain why this bill was so important to pass. When America's industrial manufacturing facilities and factories were being constructed, they typically were located on prime property along river, rail, and roads. But over the years, the changes that took place that transformed how our economy operates. It also had to deal with unfair imports coming into America. And as a result, companies failed. Many companies failed, and the sites became abandoned. Rusting hulks of former factories and weed-infested sites have become an eyesore and deter investments in downtown and urban areas. Today, these locations could still prove to be valuable in creating jobs, and that's what our prime responsibility is here. We need to remove this negative stigma that these sites pose to communities and restore these brownfields into productive resources. America has indeed been identified having 450,000 brownfield sites across the country, but only 27,000 have been cleaned up. This reauthorization is long overdue. One great success story is Pietro Ferrantini, a supplier to the natural gas industry, who recently broke ground at a new manufacturing facility in Weirton, West Virginia, that was cleaned up through the brownfield site. Ferrantini spent 5 years preparing this site because of the level of contamination. And I especially want to give a shout out to Pat Ford, and the Executive Director of the Business Development Corporation of the Northern Panhandle. His efforts have been tirelessly and working to do great things to creating jobs in the 1st District of West Virginia. His corporation, the Business Development Corporation, has already received $2.5 million over the years in brownfield grants and has leveraged those projects into $75 million in private sector money. It's resulted in over 1,250 new jobs, and another 128 have been preserved. And you've heard earlier from Chairman Shimkus talking about the 16-to-1 ratio. Pat Ford's group is a 35-to-1 ratio that for every dollar that we put in for the federal government, Pat Ford's group has generated $35 of investment. So in the future, as businesses develop the Appalachian ethane storage hub that is underway now in the Appalachian area, these newly reclaimed properties will allow for even more industries, more jobs to be created throughout this area. So this bipartisan bill makes very important clarifications to circular liability and petroleum sites. It expands the eligibility for nonprofit organizations. It does indeed increase the limit for remediation grants from $200,000 to $500,000. It does create the multi-purpose grants, but more importantly, it makes it easier for small, rural, and disadvantaged communities to participate in this program. I want to encourage all my colleagues on the Appropriation Committee, however, to fully fund this vitally important brownfield program. Although $250 million is authorized, the appropriators have only allocated $153 million to this program. Consequently, revitalization of these former abandoned sites are delayed, and they remain a stigma, deterring development in our downtown communities. So overall, this bipartisan bill. Thank you to many of my friends on the other side of the aisle, how we're all working together on this. This will make us great strides in achieving the goals of getting more contaminated sites cleaned up, promoting the infrastructure, and importantly, creating jobs. So I urge all my colleagues to vote yes and yield back my time.